Hey guys, welcome back. Will Solomon here, former pharmaceutical industry executive. And today I'm going to talk about clinical trials. I'm going to explain about clinical trials. Why is it important to understand about clinical trials if you work in the industry or you want to work? First of all, a lot of new therapies are coming out. Artificial intelligence is changing the way we do clinical trials. It can impact drug approval delays, drug launch timelines, and how competitive you are in entering the market. All right, let's talk about clinical trials 101. First, how much do clinical trials cost? Well, the cost of developing a drug from discovery to launch when the drug hits the market can vary, but usually it's about $2 billion. And the average time to bring a drug to market is about 10 to 15 years. Generic drug products are reviewed and potentially approved by the Food and Drug Administration or the FDA, and they get an abbreviated drug application that needs to be submitted to the ANDA. New trial designs have been created to reduce time, ideally, and cost by incorporating things like molecular biomarkers into the inclusion criteria. All right, you ever wonder what agency regulates clinical trials? That's the Food and Drug Administration or the FDA. They protect consumers' health, safety, and wallets by regulating food and drugs. And the main law that does this is the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. It's the basic food and drug law. It assures basically that consumers that they are getting safe and effective drugs. The devices are safe and effective. The packaging and label is truthful, informative, is not deceptive, and also ensures that they're designed and reported according to good clinical practices, what we call GCP. This is where they have to maintain certain ethical and scientific quality standards. It's to really minimize risk to patients and protects the rights to safety and the well-being of the clinical trial subjects, people that are in the studies. They also ensure that you have to provide adequate information on drugs and using scientific protocols that are proven, right? Having good scientific practices from a clinical trial design perspective. So, what's an investigational new drug? So, a lot of times when there's an unapproved indication, meaning the drug hasn't gotten approval for a particular indication, or sometimes when the drug is approved for one indication but wants a new indication, a IND will be submitted. An IND is an investigational new drug application, and these are submitted by physicians to initiate research. Sometimes you could have an emergency use IND application in situations where it's an experimental drug, you don't have maybe a lot of data, or you're in a short time frame, or you need emergency authorization to be able to administer the drug, like in the example of COVID, for example, or in some cases where there's disease with no other alternatives. A treatment IND is granted for experimental drugs that might show promise in clinical trials, again, for a serious or life threatening situation. So, these are situations where an IND would be submitted. Oftentimes within medical affairs, one of the things that medical affairs does is it will work on a product that already has an indication. Let's say, for example, you're working on a drug that has an indication for diabetes, and you find that there's some data that potentially can demonstrate that it also might help people lose weight. So you might want to get an indication for the treatment of obesity. In that case, you might go and try to expand the indication and, in essence, expand the market. So this is actually one of the roles of medical affairs and within the clinical trial setting and working with clinical development. So IND applications, investigative drug applications, are really, really critical because they help ultimately to set that stage in progress to be able to get drugs approved. All right, so let's talk about clinical trials. What are the phases of clinical trials? Phase zero is when we're examining the efficacy and safety of a new drug, and we're testing the dose really on a small population. It's not used widely, especially within oncology. A lot of times it's preclinical, it could be used in animals. Phase one is where we're identifying the maximum dose that can be used without severe safety effects. In phase two, really asking the question, is the treatment effective, reaching its endpoints, biomarkers, patient-related outcomes, progression-free survival. Phase three, does the treatment improve what is currently available? And so this is where we might get into double-blind, placebo-controlled studies. Phase three, the studies last longer than phase one or two. And then phase four, the question is, do we need any other clarifications? Are we looking for any types of other markers? And then there's real-world evidence studies. This is where it's patient outcomes data outside of randomized clinical trials. And, ultimately, when it comes to clinical trials, when you think about when medical affairs typically gets initiated, it's usually within phase two. So this is when the pharmaceutical company will begin to put together a medical science liaison team. So if you're looking for a job, for example, as a medical science liaison, one of the tricks you can use is to see which companies, which companies actually are in phase two, like towards the end of phase two. A lot of times, those companies, if they're going to go to phase three, they feel pretty confident about their phase two data and will begin to put together a field medical team. So be sure to subscribe, follow, comment below. Let us know the topics that you're interested in hearing about, and we'll talk to you guys soon.